My name is Rai Willow. I'm 38 years old, a mother of 3, and I live in a quiet suburb in Sydney, Australia. If you'd asked me 6 months ago, I would have told you my life was normal, busy but predictable. I had no reason to believe that June 9th, 2023 would change everything. That day, I died, and what I saw on the other side shook me to my core. It was a rainy Friday morning, and my house buzzed with the usual chaos. My kids were late for school, breakfast dishes piled up in the sink, and I felt the all-too-familiar tug of stress. As I dashed down the staircase, trying to grab my youngest forgotten lunchbox, my foot slipped. In an instant, the world tilted. My body slammed against the steps, each impact stealing the air from my lungs. Pain shot through me, sharp and relentless, and then, nothing. A cold, creeping stillness spread through my limbs, like frost overtaking a window pane. I woke to the sound of my husband's voice. His arms were wrapped around me, trembling as he carried me to the car. "Stay with me, Rai," he pleaded, his voice cracking under the weight of his fear. The drive to the hospital was a blur of headlights, rain, and panic. My husband kept glancing at me, whispering prayers I could barely hear. But even his desperation couldn't hold me. Something dark and unrelenting was pulling me away. My breaths grew shallow, my vision dimmed, and a crushing weight settled on my chest. And then it happened. One moment, I was in the car. The next, I was outside of it, staring at my own body slumped in the passenger seat. I wasn't in pain anymore. In fact, I felt free. The world around me seemed sharper, brighter, and yet utterly foreign. My husband's cries were muffled, like a distant echo. I wanted to comfort him, to say, "I'm still here," but my voice wouldn't come. I was weightless, untethered, and utterly alone. Suddenly, the scene before me dissolved. The car, the rain, even my husband, all of it vanished, replaced by an expanse of light and stillness. I found myself in a place that defied description. The air shimmered with hues I had never seen, and the ground beneath me seemed alive, humming with energy. It was breathtakingly beautiful, but I wasn't at peace. A sense of foreboding gripped me, an unshakable certainty that this wasn't a dream. This was real, and I was somewhere far beyond the life I'd known. Before I could make sense of it, a figure appeared in the distance. He was dressed in radiant white, his presence both commanding and gentle. Though I couldn't see his face clearly, I felt his gaze pierce through me, exposing every thought, every secret. "Rai," he said, his voice like a melody I'd always known but couldn't place. "You cannot stay here. There is something you must see, something you must tell." My heart raced as the light around us dimmed, and a vision began to form. What I saw next would haunt me forever. The light around me faded, and in its place came darkness, thick and oppressive, pressing against my chest like a vice. Then, slowly, scenes began to emerge from the void, vivid and terrifying. It was as if I were watching the world from above, but it wasn't the world I knew. I saw a year flash before me, 2025. At first, everything seemed normal. Families gathered around tables, children played in parks, and cities buzzed with life. But then, cracks began to form, subtle at first, but quickly spreading like fractures in glass. The atmosphere grew heavy, thick with despair, as the visions sharpened into horrifying clarity. I saw people arguing, husbands and wives, parents and children, friends and co-workers. The tension between them was palpable, their words cutting like knives. And behind their anger, I sensed something darker, unforgiveness. Grudges had taken root in their hearts, festering into bitterness. Then came the first wave. Death swept through like a shadow, sudden and indiscriminate. Homes fell silent as loved ones were taken. Families were shattered, their grief so raw I could feel it echo through my soul. I saw brilliant minds, doctors, artists, scientists, cut down in their prime, their potential snuffed out. It wasn't random. These were people who carried the weight of unforgiveness, and it had marked them for destruction. I turned to the man in white, my voice trembling. "Why is this happening?" His face was etched with sorrow, and tears glistened in his eyes. "Unforgiveness," he said simply. "It is a poison that destroys not only relationships but souls." In 2025, Many will refuse to let go of their anger, and the spirit of death will claim them. Bitterness binds them, and they cannot escape its grip. I watched as more scenes unfolded. Hospitals overflowing, communities mourning, and the earth itself groaning under the weight of humanity's sins. Natural disasters struck with relentless fury. Hurricanes, earthquakes, and floods, each more devastating than the last. Cities burned, and nations teetered on the edge of collapse. Amid the chaos, I noticed lines of people standing in a vast, barren landscape. Their faces were etched with regret, their shoulders hunched under the weight of invisible burdens. They were waiting for something, though I didn't know what. "What is this place?" I whispered. "This is where souls come to give an account," the man in white replied. Many of these people lived lives of great success, but their hearts were hardened. They held on to grudges until it was too late. As I watched, a chill ran through me. One by one, the souls stepped forward, each facing a moment of reckoning. Their sorrow was overwhelming as they realized the depth of their mistakes. Opportunities missed, love withheld, and forgiveness denied. Then the vision changed again. I saw a place of torment, unlike anything I could have imagined. It wasn't just fire and brimstone, it was despair incarnate. The cries of those trapped there echoed endlessly, their regret tangible and suffocating. They were there because they had chosen hate over love, pride over humility, and bitterness over forgiveness. The man in white wept openly now. "This is not what I want for them," he said, his voice heavy with grief. "But choices have consequences." I felt an urgency rising in me, a desperate need to stop this from happening. But before I could speak, the vision shifted again. Now, I saw a glimmer of hope. In the midst of the chaos, there were those who chose differently. Families reconciled, communities came together, and people humbled themselves to seek forgiveness and offer it in return. Their faces shone with peace, even amid the trials. "The future is not set," the man said. "This is why you must return. Tell them what you have seen. Warn them that the time is short." I wanted to argue, to plead to stay in this place of wisdom and light. But deep down, I knew he was right. Then he looked directly at me, his gaze filled with authority and love. "Rai, your work is not finished. You have been given a mission, to call people back to forgiveness, love, and the truth of my word." Before I could respond, the light enveloped me, and I felt myself being pulled back, the peace of the realm replaced by the chaos of life. When I opened my eyes, I was in the hospital, surrounded by beeping monitors and the worried faces of my husband and children. Tears streamed down my cheeks as the weight of what I had seen settled on my heart. But one thing was clear. I had been given a second chance, not just to live, but to change lives. The days following my return were anything but ordinary. The hospital room felt like a fragile cocoon, shielding me from the enormity of what I had witnessed. But even in the quiet moments, the images of 2025 haunted me. The grief of those left behind, the souls in torment, and the urgent plea from Jesus to share his message. They were etched into my heart like a burning flame. When I was finally discharged, my husband, Luke, brought me home. The relief in his eyes was evident, but beneath it, I could sense his unspoken questions. That night, as we sat at the dining table, I told him everything. Every detail, every vision, every word spoken by the man in white. Luke listened in silence, his hands gripping mine tightly. "Rai," he said finally, his voice trembling, "what do we do? How do we even begin to tell people something this heavy?" I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "We start with ourselves," I whispered. "We forgive, we let go of every grudge, and we love each other fiercely. Then, we share the message with whoever will listen. We can't keep this to ourselves, Luke. People need to know." The next morning, I sat down to pray, seeking guidance for the mission ahead. I was filled with gratitude for my second chance at life, but overwhelmed by the enormity of the task. The words of Jesus echoed in my mind. "Tell them what you have seen." I began by reaching out to my family. It wasn't easy. There were wounds that had festered for years, misunderstandings, and pain that felt impossible to heal. But I knew what was at stake. With every call and heartfelt apology, I felt a weight lift. My siblings cried, my parents softened, and for the first time in years, We began to rebuild the bonds that had been broken. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Then came the harder part, sharing the message with the world. I wasn't a preacher, a writer, or anyone important. I was just a 34-year-old mother from Sydney. But God doesn't call the equipped. He equips the called. I began speaking at local churches, sharing my testimony. The response was immediate and overwhelming. People wept openly, their hearts breaking as they realized the consequences of their own unforgiveness. Strangers approached me after each service, confessing their struggles and vowing to reconcile with those they'd wronged. But the mission wasn't without challenges. Some dismissed me as delusional, others ridiculed my story, and a few outright rejected the message. It hurt, but I pressed on, knowing the urgency of what I had seen. One night, while preparing to speak at another event, I prayed fervently for strength. The weight of it all threatened to crush me, but then I remembered Jesus' tears, the deep, unrelenting love in his eyes. He wasn't asking for perfection. He was asking for obedience. As I stood before the crowd that evening, I spoke with a new boldness. 2025 is not just a warning, it's an opportunity, I said, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. An opportunity to forgive, to love, and to turn back to God before it's too late. What I saw was terrifying. Yes, but it wasn't the end of the story. There's hope. There's always hope. The room fell silent, and I could see the impact of my words etched on every face. People weren't just hearing me. They were feeling the gravity of the message. Today, as I look back on that near-death experience, I know it was a turning point, not just for me but for everyone willing to listen. The visions of 2025 were a wake-up call, a glimpse of what happens when we let bitterness rule our hearts. But they were also a call to action, a chance to change the future through forgiveness and faith. I don't know what lies ahead, but I do know this. The God who showed me those visions is the same God who offers us redemption. And as long as I have breath, I will proclaim his message, one soul at a time. The question is, will you hear it? Will you let go of the anger, the hurt, the grudges that weigh you down? Will you choose love, forgiveness, and the peace that only Jesus can offer? The choice is yours. The time is now. Let's face 2025 together, with hearts unburdened and lives transformed.